Everyone, let us sit down and convene. Okay, all set. I'd ask Mr. Nguyen, please, to deliver the invocation.
Thank you. Let us pray, please. Father, we thank you, Lord, for your blessings on our day today. What a beautiful day that you've given us here in Southwest Florida. We ask, God, that you would grant us your wisdom, your guidance as we look at the agenda before us. And we just thank you for everyone that's here today using their gifts and their talents to serve this city. In your name we ask. Amen.
Thank you. Let's stand, please, for the pledge. Raise the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Sherman Rassio,
Here.
Bruce Galloway,
Here.
Russ Wynn,
Here.
Gary Gambrell,
Here.
Ben Hershenson,
Here.
Jerry Benson,
Here.
Linda Waterhouse. Here.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the meeting held on March 15th, 2022. May I have a motion to approve those minutes, please?
So moved. So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Okay. Okay, now, as is our wont, we will have public comments after the presentations from the applicant and from the city. Will Mr. Rooney please swear
I
the,
will. You want me to start swearing at everyone? All right.
oh, thank you. Yeah.
Anyone intending to give testimony today, or if you are a member of the public who wishes to speak, please stand, raise your right hand. And do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. All right. Keep her out of it. All right.
Okay? Okay. The first case is the Soltura at East Terry Residential Plan Development, a request to rezone approximately 20 acres from residential plan development to residential plan development for 200 dwelling units and to request 4 deviations. We are ready to proceed. Mr. Fegan will...
Good morning. Mike Fegan with Community Development for the record. I'll just give you a brief synopsis and then, per usual, let the applicant go first. Yes, as you heard, this is a request to rezone approximately 20 acres from a now defunct residential plan development to a new residential plan development. The previous approval was for 200 units. This approval is also for 200 units, but it's not considered an amendment to the previous RPD rezoning. This is a new application, new master concept plan, the whole nine. Staff and the applicant are in agreement on the conditions of approval except for the traffic conditions. So what you'll probably see that staff and the applicant will be focusing on those during the presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to the applicant.
Thank you.
Can we just use the little arrows?
Yes, ma'am. Oh, you can use this, ma'am. Here, this is for this is your pointer.
Oh, I like little arrows.
Okay, whatever works for you.
Me and my...
Good morning. For the record, Neil Montgomery. We're here with the Saltura team, and the first witness we're going to have is going to be Jeremy France, and we'd like to have him accepted as an expert in planning and zoning. And so we're going to do a brief voir dire if you would like, or if you'd like to just accept him.
I don't know if the board is familiar with Mr. France, but if not, he can come forward and give his credentials. Would that be acceptable?
Sounds fine with me.
Sure. So, Jeremy France, for the record. I have been working as a planner in Southwest Florida for Collier County for almost 7 years, and now with RVI, Planning and Landscape Architecture. Previously, we were Waldrop. Just about 8 years in planning here in Southwest Florida. Worked as a planner in the zoning division for Collier County, and have been working with RVI Planning and Landscape Architecture for the past year.
Could you provide us with your educational background?
Sure. I have a master's in urban and regional planning from University of Florida.
And so you have worked on the government side, the private side, and the not-for-profit side?
That's right.
So you've covered all aspects of planning and zoning.
Correct.
We would ask that he be accepted as an expert.
And that's over 8 years.
Thank you.
Correct.
Any objections from the board?
I'm sorry?
Any objections from the board?
No, I don't think so. No, let's proceed.
Thank you. So as I said, my name is Jeremy France. We do have the rest of the Soltura team today. We have Danville Ledbetter with Soltura Development Group, Neil Montgomery, who has already introduced herself. We have Charlie Krebs from Hol Montez. Myself, Jeremy France, with RVI Planning and Landscape Architecture. We have Ted Treesh with TR Transportation Consultants. I believe on Zoom is Barrett Stayskull with Bear Paws Environmental Consulting. And our landscape architect is Andrea Douglas with Verdant Studios. I have a larger presentation, but I'll try to keep it as brief as possible. Just a little introduction to Soltura Development Group. Many of you may know Danville Ledbetter. As a part of Soltura with Aaron Simon, they've been developing high-quality communities in Southwest Florida for the past 15 years and have experience with a number of different asset types, including residential master plan communities. And they have used innovative design to address housing needs, housing market needs here in Southwest Florida in a number of other communities, including the Soltura at the Forum in Fort Myers, which is kind of a similar project to what we're proposing today. Brief introduction to the property location. We are a 20-acre property that is about a half mile east. I need to learn my directions this morning. A half mile west of Bonita Grand on East Terry at the intersection with Kent Road. The site was previously developed as an RV park, and the RV park has since been removed, but no development occurred on the site, so the environmental conditions have continued to degrade since then. The future land use of the property is designated high-density residential that allows for a range of residential development types, a maximum density of 10 units per acre, and a maximum height of 75 feet. The current zoning is Eagle Lakes RPD. It was rezoned back in 2008, and that is when it was allowed to develop with 200 dwelling units at 10 units per acre per the future land use designation, and a maximum height of 35 feet was allowed. You can see on the property that there's a number of multifamily residential buildings along the west and north and south property lines. Our request today does not include any increase in density or height. We're sticking to that maximum of 200 dwelling units and 35 feet, limited to 1 or 2 stories. We're really just modifying the layout to accommodate this multifamily development and updating the site layout due to the nature of the development. We're including 4 deviations related to parking requirements, lake setbacks from the right-of-way, lake sinuosity, and perimeter setbacks. And as I said, modifying the master concept plan to include these changes. So here you can see our proposed master concept plan. On your right is East Terry, so that would be south. You can see we're proposing 2 access points, one aligned with Kent Road and one further to the east. There is a preserve area on the eastern property line, and a few residential tracts, which is where we would have our multifamily buildings, and an amenity tract in the center towards that lake to the south. There's, we think, quite a few improvements in this master concept plan over the previously approved plan. We are requesting fewer deviations, so improved consistency with your land development code. We're providing for multiple points of access, as I stated. We are actually increasing the open space over the currently approved and improving the stormwater management for the site. You'll see in the next few slides that we're pretty significantly reducing the bulk of the buildings that are going to be adjacent to the Morton Grove residential community and the East Terry Street. We're reducing the maximum number of stories from 3 to 1 or 2. And we're providing a larger setback along East Terry Street and improving that streetscape by including things like a multi-use trail easement. So the multifamily units that we are proposing are cottage apartments. They go by a number of different names, but essentially these are all rental units. They're freestanding apartments. It's kind of an apartment building that's been deconstructed and spread throughout the site. They're just like a multifamily development. There will be on-site property management and a lifestyle coordinator. There will be a variety of unit types that'll include 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. It's different than your a typical single family development in that it allows for no down payment, no mortgage, no maintenance required on your individual units, and no shared walls. So it kind of provides the benefits of privacy to a multifamily dwelling type. Some examples that I'll kind of run through quickly of other cottage apartments that Soltura Development has begun development on. Here is Altera by Soltura. You can see a couple of multifamily buildings. There's shared parking and sidewalks throughout. This is from Odyssey by Soltura. This is in Fort Myers. Here you can see what the backyards will look like. There is private yards for each unit. Kind of going through these quickly. Again, we're going back and forth between Altair and Odyssey, and you can get a sense for what this community will look like on East Terry as well. Here's an example of potential amenity site. Again, you can see the shared parking surrounding the site and multifamily units kind of throughout and surrounding the amenity center. An example of the gated entry. And this really kind of gives you the sense of the multifamily nature of the units, where although it's outside, it does kind of function like your apartment hallway. Getting to compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood, you can see a cross-section here. This would show you an east to west cross-section of the development. You can see preserves on the east side of the property. You can see parking and drive aisles in the middle, and the size of the units is very comparable to the existing residential in Morton Grove. And here you can see the same idea running north to south, so you can see where there is a buffer to East Terry, lakes in the southern area of the property, and then the home sites throughout. The location for multifamily high density is pretty ideal here. You can see a number of public infrastructure sites right nearby, including the Bonita Springs YMCA and soccer complex just to the south of the property. Pine Lake Preserve also to the south on the other side of Kent Road. Bonita Nature Places in that same area in Cullum's Trail Park. The fire station and EMC Center, EMS Center, sorry, are on Bonita Grand. And, you know, beyond the public infrastructure along Bonita Beach Road, east of I-75, as you know, there's quite a lot of commercial, office, non-residential development that this Soltura development will be able to take advantage of and utilize. We held 3 neighborhood information meetings in August, January, and most recently in February at the Bonita Springs Fire Rescue Building on Bonita Grand. We had a few people at each meeting and received some comments and questions about environmental considerations, traffic, and stormwater. We worked with those individuals and with staff to try to narrow down these issues, and I think you see that reflected in the agreement on most of the conditions between staff and the applicant. Excuse me. So the only 2 conditions that we are not in agreement, as Mike mentioned, are the traffic conditions. I'll run through a couple of slides that we had prepared, but I don't think we need to get to. If you have any questions, we can come back to these and skip right to those transportation slides. And for that, I'll bring up Ted Treesh with TR Transportation.
Good morning. Ted Treesh with TR Transportation Consultants. We prepared the traffic analysis as part of this application. And as you know, it's quite an extensive process we have to go through for the traffic analysis for the city. We have a methodology meeting and notes with the city that we exchange with the city's traffic consultant. We conduct the analysis. We address comments that are issued by the city to get to this point. As Jeremy indicated, this product is a multifamily product. It's your typically multifamily land use. What we utilize in doing our traffic studies is the ITE, the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Report. That's what's generally accepted. That's what's we've been using in the city for a number of years. And we simply use the multifamily trip generation category for this land use. But because it doesn't look like a multifamily use, there were some questions raised by city staff on, is this truly a multifamily project, and will it generate traffic consistent with a multifamily project? Just some other points, as Jeremy indicated, there are 2 points of ingress and egress onto East Terry. The eastern access, which is shown on this slide, which is the one at the top of the drawing, that is an exit only onto East Terry. So resident only will be able to exit out onto East Terry. The entrance will be opposite Kent Road, basically creating the 4th leg or the north leg of the Kent Road intersection. And as part of that intersection improvement, we'll be putting in a right turn lane on Kent Road. So as you're coming from Bonita Grand, there'll be a right turn lane to utilize to enter that right turn lane and enter the side access drive. It'll be a gated community, and we meet the stacking requirements of the gate per the land development code. Everything else in the application in terms of transportation, we're in compliance with the comprehensive plan and the land development code. In terms of impacts and level of service on the area roadways, we meet the standards as indicated in the staff report. The one real issue came down to, from a trip generation standpoint, is this truly a multifamily project? So there's 2 conditions that were placed on the staff report that we're in disagreement with. The first is condition 5. And let me just read what condition 5 says. It says, at the time of local development order, the applicant shall submit, along with the TIS, an intersection control evaluation study for the Kent Road, East Terry Street intersection. And again, at the time of development order, we have to do another traffic study pursuant to the codes of the city. We have to have a methodology meeting, again, with the city staff. At the time of DO is really when you know exactly how many units you're going to build, so it's a more specific analysis that can be done at the time of development order. The intersection control evaluation study, which is commonly referred to as an ICE study, is a study that was developed by FDOT. You can see this is the cover of their manual that was developed probably about 4 or 5 years ago out of FDOT to look at projects on highways and roadways and intersections that were going through improvements, specifically if you were looking at doing a traffic signal. There's a number of different intersections, design alternatives now that are available that have been looked at. There's roundabouts, there's what's called R-cut intersections. You've seen a number of interchanges being redone now with different configurations. So there's a number of different intersection alternatives that basically the ICE manual was the direction by FDOT that before you install a traffic signal, let's evaluate other options to see if that, if anything, is a better option for an intersection. Again, the definition of the ICE is shown on the slide here. The intersection control evaluation is a data-driven, performance-based framework and approach used to objectively screen alternatives and identify an optimal geometric and controlled solution for an intersection. And we're not in disagreement with the ICE, but the issue is the intersection of Bonita Grand and Kent is a city-controlled intersection. We are simply creating the fourth leg and adding some minor movements to that intersection. Our volumes that we're anticipated to add to that intersection are right around 10% of the total intersection volumes. Certainly not enough to warrant a future traffic signal. Kent Road to the south, as you are aware, serves the YMCA and those facilities. And again, our analysis of that intersection at this time shows that the traffic volumes coming out of that road on the south side, again, do not warrant a traffic signal. So, you know what? To my knowledge, I have not seen this condition on any other development in the city of Bonita Springs. Again, this is a high-level FDOT analysis. It's very data intensive. These are just some of the analysis sheets that go into looking at what an ICE evaluation is. There's quite a number of factors that go into an evaluation. There's several steps that you look at. Once you get through one step, you look at going into the next phase, depending upon what the results of the analysis are. In terms of the requirements that are currently in place in the city for a development order, in my opinion, this would more than double the requirements of what this applicant would have to go through in terms of an analysis of this intersection, just in terms of the time and the effort required to do this level of analysis.
Which intersection?
This is at Bonita Grand and Kent Road.
But your
I mean, I'm
slide
sorry,
number
East Terry and East Terry and Kent
That's
Road.
very confusing.
East Terry and Kent Road. I'm sorry, what?
That's very confusing. You've been talking about Bonita Grand, and what
I'm
we're
sorry.
actually talking about is Kent Road.
I'm talking
and
about East Terry and Kent Road. If I mistakenly say Bonita Grand, I apologize.
May I understand that your main objection to meeting this condition is that it's going to require extra work on your part?
It's quite a bit of extensive extra work that's not required in the current codes in terms of what a TIS has to evaluate at the time of the development order.
So basically, it's just extra work.
If I'd like to ask Mr. Treese some questions. Mr. Treese, the FDOT analysis is to determine what kind of intersection improvements are done on a public road, correct?
That's correct.
And typically, that analysis originally was just done by FDOT on FDOT-controlled roads. So it's a government analysis typically for the government to decide what to do on their roads.
That's correct.
This is not something that the private sector does, to decide what the government should do at their intersections.
That's true.
So what's happening here is we're asking the private sector to do something that's really a government function, to tell the government what's the best option that they should pick. Does that typically work well when the private sector tries to tell the government what to do?
In my opinion, no.
Again, extra work.
And again,
saying-
looking at an intersection that we are required, again, we're putting in a right turn lane on East Terry Street at Kent Road to enter our site. There's already an existing left turn lane as you're heading eastbound on East Terry to turn into the project. So it's an unsignalized intersection along East Terry. The volumes we've looked at this point and nowhere near satisfy the need for a traffic signal. And again, an ICE analysis is needed and required by FDOT when and if a traffic signal is being considered. In my opinion, this intersection will never be signalized.
So we have a difference of opinion between the city and the applicant.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, I just have a point.
Sure.
The city certainly, when it makes its presentation, has to justify for the board, I would think, the rationale behind making that condition
Correct.
possible. So could I suggest we just kind of move on from
Well,
this one spot?
I got the answer that I was looking for,
Okay.
just that.
Once we figured out which intersection we're talking about,
Well, it's.
I apologize.
It's Kent and East.
Let's move on.
East Terry and Kent Road intersection. Again, these are just some of the spreadsheets that you look through. So the second issue again was with regards to the trip generation regarding the project. Again, our analysis showed that the intersection of East Terry and Kent will operate at a level service C. All the movements will operate at a level service C, which is well within the acceptable methods and operational analysis. This table shows the trip generation of the project as a whole based on the multifamily use. It's a very low trip generator compared to other uses and even compared to a single-family product. In order to alleviate some of the concerns that staff had regarding the trip generation, and again, this goes to condition number 6 that we also have an objection to. Condition number 6 says, at the time of local development order, the applicant and the city will agree on appropriate traffic monitoring provisions. And we're not quite certain what those appropriate traffic monitoring provisions are. Again, the codes that are adopted by the city right now do not have any such requirements, so this condition is being put on this project. The only other project that I'm aware of that had something similar was the recent approval of the facility that was recently approved at the card room with the, what was that project called next to the card room?
The one where the dog track was taken down and the card room.
Yeah, with the entertainment facilities, they're going next to the card room that had the golf court, but that facility was something new and never been, we didn't have any trip generation data for that. I did the traffic study for that project, and there was no such trip generation data for it because there is no such facility like that in the country. So it was a first of its kind. So the city put on a transportation monitoring condition on that project because we simply didn't know the trip generation characteristics of that type of use. But again, this is a multifamily product. What we did was submitted to the city actual traffic counts of existing properties that are exactly the same as what we're proposing here on this 20 acres. One property is in Lakewood Ranch, just to our north in Manatee County. And you can see the trip rates are listed in this table for the properties. Right now, that's the only property that's completed. There are many under construction. And as Jeremy said, there's one under construction right now in the Forum in the city of Fort Myers. There are many others under construction right now. Some have just been finished, but they aren't quite leased up yet in the state of Florida. There are many that are available and finished and have been finished for several years in the state of Texas. So we surveyed 3 additional properties in the state of Texas in the Dallas metropolitan area. And again, those trip rates are exactly in line and consistent with the trip generation rates that are included in the ITE trip generation manual for a multifamily use. This is a multifamily use. It's one property, it's one property owner, it has a management company. If you want to lease a unit, you go in, park, go into the leasing office, you talk to a leasing consultant, you are shown a model unit. I mean, it's just like renting an apartment. As Jeremy indicated, the only difference is instead of a stacked building, the apartments are all on the ground level and separated by sidewalks. It has a common parking area, it has common amenity areas, a clubhouse, fitness center, etc. So it's our opinion that this facility is a multifamily unit. It will function and will be operated as a multifamily product. There's no need to put an appropriate monitoring provision on this project. We're putting in the turn lanes, paying the impact fees at the time of development order that are appropriate for a multifamily use.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Mr. Trish, in light of the fact that you went to the trouble of getting actual data from actual projects, it is your expert opinion that that validated the multifamily trip generation.
Yes.
Was there any information that you gathered that would indicate something other than the multifamily trip generation?
No.
And it's my understanding that this product was generated in part due to rising housing costs and COVID and people not wanting to share hallways and space. And so we're just catching up with other parts of the country, which
Well,
is why we don't have more local data.
Yeah, I mean, that's outside of my expertise, but I'm working on several projects that are very similar to this in the Southwest Florida area.
So it's now arrived.
Yes.
Not as nice though. Not as nice.
Okay, I want to go back to the ICE analysis. When a condition is put in the zoning, it's supposed to be based on the impacts of the project. Based on your testimony, is there anything about the trip generation of this project that warrants the time and expense of doing an ICE analysis?
No. The intersection operates at an acceptable level of service. All the movements are level service C based on the existing configuration of the intersection with the improvements that we're making with the turn lanes. The level service meets the goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan. We're not exceeding any criteria that are outlined in those goals and objectives that would require any other conditions.
Well, and you talked about traffic monitoring. Let's kind of go back in time. You've worked on several developments of regional impact, correct?
Yes.
An example in the city of developments of regional impact would be Pelican Landing, Bonita Bay. Those large thousands of units projects with commercial originally required traffic monitoring, is that correct?
That is correct.
So the legislature originally required it every year,
That's correct.
and then they changed to every other year,
Correct.
and now it's no longer required even for massive projects.
That's correct.
But we're going to ask a 200-unit project that already is approved for 200 units to do traffic monitoring. Is that consistent with the direction that the legislature in the state's going?
No.
Thank you.
In addition to the extra time, have you done how much it's gonna cost you to do this work?
How much it's going to cost? An ICE analysis typically is between, depending on what level and how many levels we have to go, between 5 and 10,000.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
The intersection of East Terry Road and Kent Street,
Correct.
heading east from there, we're heading towards Bonita Grand. How many residential units are east of the subject property? Bounded by Dewey Road and
Do you have an
what's the other one? Bonita Beach Road? How many other houses are out here? How many other people live out here?
East of our site to Bonita Grand, there are none. You can see on this aerial. To our west, between Kent Road and the interstate, there's the Morton Grove access, where Morton Grove comes out and Morton Road, but
Why we need pointers. So everything east going out to Bonita Grand,
It's a wilderness.
it's a wilderness.
is vacant.
So did I hear you say that this is only going to increase traffic 25% at that intersection?
Our project is approximately 10% of the total
10%.
intersection volume at East Terry and Kent Road.
Well, who else is using the intersection if nobody lives out?
Can I interject here?
Yes,
If you go East Terry, cross over Bonita Grand,
I can.
there are several homes out that way. There's a horse farm out there. So there are some residents out there east of that. On East Terry is a dirt road. Some large acreage, some other homes out there. Very small though. I mean,
Sparse.
it's just
No
not a
development.
whole lot, you know, so.
To answer your question, the volume on East Terry is primarily commuter traffic from the east. Logan Boulevard connection now to Bonita Beach Road. They come to Bonita Grand north and use East Terry to travel west to get to downtown Bonita, Old 41 corridor.
Can I
That
make another,
traffic
can
has
I make another
increased.
comment?
Please.
We own, the church out there owns about 8 acres, and we have our office out there. And as you're saying, the volume that's coming in is from all that development east of Bonita Beach Road, and they have found a little shortcut. So that's where that volume's coming in. Instead of going straight down Bonita Beach Road, they take they go down to Bonita Grand, make that little shortcut, East Terry, go hit Imperial that way. So you got this line of traffic that, especially in the morning and evening, you could just tell that the city's going to have to address that down the
I
road.
think you're right.
But that's the volume. It's not that people are living there, it's people are using it. It's almost like a shortcut.
That's a shortcut?
Yeah.
Because we don't want to do the intersection of Bonita Beach and Imperial.
No. 'Cause that
We'll
gets
do anything to avoid that.
That's the truth of the matter right now.
And your church is Anchor Christian?
No, we have some undeveloped property that we're going to be addressing later on. But we're out there anyhow with a house and some property, and we see that constantly going through. It's just the volume coming through from other, from other sources.
If we're making it a shortcut, we're speeding, yada, yada, yada.
So,
Did you include the project that's planned in the quarry? If you extend Bonita Grande north? I don't know how many houses are planned there. Is it a couple thousand at the core?
That project isn't included specifically because that project will take much longer to build out than we looked at. This project will be built entirely at once. They don't build these in phases. This will be built at once. So we looked at a much shorter build-out time. So we looked at a growth rate on the existing traffic to get to our build-out year. So that would include any additional traffic from future development, such as the project at the Bonita Grand Mine, but not specifically all of those trips, since that project will take much longer to build out than our project will.
Anything else? You have a question, Gary?
No, that was an okay, sorry. No, thank you very much. I
All right, thank
appreciate you being
Bruce,
here.
you had a question?
Yeah, I have one
Please,
question.
Mr. Galloway?
Your projects in Texas, were they located out in the wilderness like this, or were they located in metropolitan areas?
They were in the suburbs, out in the wilderness. I wouldn't call this the wilderness.
Oh, Exurbia.
The exurb, right. So they were in more built-up areas?
Yes,
would you say?
yes.
Okay, because this project looks to me like it's going to be very dependent on cars. There are no sidewalks anywhere to be found.
The
on
projects
Perry
we
Street in Rio
surveyed
Grande.
didn't have public transit nearby. There was no rail transit. It wasn't a city center at all. It was out in the suburbs, probably from the Dallas, probably 15, 20 miles outside of the Beltway. So it was very car-dependent properties.
Is it also safe to assume that you will have some younger families moving here with children requiring school buses and other kinds of transportation like that?
Well, that's not my area. I'll let the folks that are building it answer that question.
But that would impact traffic, in your opinion? School buses?
That's all part of the analysis, yes. I mean, that's part of the traffic. Most apartments, in my experience,
But
don't
that-
don't have school children as
I'm
much
sorry?
as. Most apartment communities, in my experience, don't have school-aged children.
Really? Okay. We'll talk to someone about what kind of families are gonna go in there, please. Let's go.
You want to talk about that?
So, Danville Ledbetter with Soltura Development Group. Hello, everybody. So this is just like a traditional apartment. For all the same reasons the traditional apartment generates less traffic than single family, this does as well. And
Explain that to me.
sure, sure.
Why?
So in a single family neighborhood, this came up at a couple of our neighborhood meetings. And a single-family neighborhood, you could have 5 families living in a single-family house where you've got, and you see it all the time, we see it in Morton Grove, where you might have 5 or 6 cars in a driveway. You can't do that in a commercially marketed apartment
Just because of space limitations.
because of space limitations, and typically the professionally managed company will limit how many people can live in a single unit. So that's part of it. These are fairly new in Southwest Florida. We are building right now 2 of the very first in Southwest Florida in Fort Myers, okay? So do I know exactly the demographic? Not yet, I don't. I do think you'll have families living here, just like you do in apartments as well. I do think we will have school bus traffic. There's going to be children in their need to go to school. But as Ted mentioned, I think that's represented inside of his studies. It's a part of what he's looking at as well. But you have a wide spectrum of folks that are choosing to rent now versus own. It goes all the way from, the snowbird, all the way down to your traveling nurse or, somebody that may not yet have enough money saved up for a deposit, and so but they don't want to live in a traditional apartment anymore. What our research found was people that move into these types of cottage-style apartments see moving back to a traditional apartment as a step backward. So they typically will either stay in this, and that's another thing, is we see family and residents and just people stay in these units for long periods of time. They may rent for 3 years versus 1 year in a traditional apartment. So you don't have the same transient. You build neighborhood, basically, is what ends up happening. People are more invested both in their property but also the community at large because they have a tendency to stay. Call them sticky leases, if you will. So that's some of the benefit of this product over a traditional apartment. And for those reasons, it generates less traffic. And that's why when Ted does his analysis and he sees these, and we did the one up in Lakewood, and it is the only one that's functioning. There are a number now. I mean, these started kind of out in Phoenix, Arizona. There's about 100 of these now in Phoenix, Arizona. We didn't target that. We didn't want to go that far west, so we stayed in Texas because there's also a number of these in Texas. So they're in Plano, Frisco, Dallas, all over the place. And these are fairly populated areas, more populated than Bonita, let's put it that way.
Can
So,
you give me a small hint on the demographics in Texas?
So they probably don't have the average age is probably less. I'm going to guess a little bit here because, I'm just going off of demographics that I've looked at, but I'm not an expert. It's not where I develop, so just bear with me. But I'll say the demographics are probably yield a little bit younger to some extent. So you probably, in those communities that we're analyzing, there's probably more families than what we're going to see. We're going to have less.
Because of the different locations,
Different locations, we pull more snowbirds, right? We have our demographic here is older than the demographic is in Texas, just by the nature of the people that like to live here. So from that perspective, I think Texas, this is just my opinion, would yield a higher traffic because you're going to have a younger volume, you're going to have a younger group of people living inside the units than you would see here typically. But with that said, I do think you're going to see families. This is a great housing opportunity for the young family that can't. Let's be honest, the affordability of housing is very difficult now for folks. The first-time home buyers basically been squeezed out of the market, right? And they continue to get squeezed even harder because the institutional investor is coming in hard at that demographic because they want to rent. They want to rent these because they know that there's marketability to rentals, So they're competing now with the first-time home buyer, and that's why when we brought this to the market, we felt very good about bringing another potential solution. It's not for everybody, right? You're still an apartment community. There are walkways. You're not seeing them on the PD because it's not a required LDC, but there are walkways throughout the community, and you have to because you got to get somebody from the parking lot to their home. And you got to get people have to traverse internally to get to the amenity. So
that's the next thing I was going to ask you. Is there a communal parking lot or is there a spot in front of each apartment? And if so, how many? Just one car?
So we're tied to multifamily code. This is an apartment, so I have to provide, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just going to, two spaces for the 3-bedroom, 2 spaces for the 2-bedroom, and 1.5 space for a 1-bedroom, all right? Anyway, we're complying with whatever the LDC requires for multifamily parking. So there's a limit. We've actually Ted studied it. It's actually overparked. Technically, we could provide less parking, but it's about 40% overparked. But that's not. I'm not here to argue that. We're following code. Whatever code tells us, that's what we do.
Good question.
So basically, we provide that both in regular open stalls, and then we also have a marketable option where you could choose to rent a covered, parking stall, or you could choose to rent a garage, and some people do. So those all are.
Garages on the premises.
There would be garages on the premises for additional.
There are.
There are garages on the premises.
Where are they in the site plan?
I didn't see that.
I didn't see it either. They're all marked residential, if I'm not mistaken.
I saw some pictures of it.
I just want to clarify, we're not talking about a parking garage like you would see in a downtown environment type of thing. We're talking about some individual garages that would be
Sure,
attached
like
to some of the
a storage space with a garage door.
According to my calculations, carports and garages provide 22% of the required parking.
Where'd you find that?
Somewhere between page 3 and page 5.
Yeah.
So,
It's a direct quote.
and that's
And
right.
the other note that I had in regard to that, the parking spaces per dwelling unit here, 1.89. So 1.89 parking spaces per dwelling unit. And in Lakewood Ranch, which you talk about a lot, there are 2.8 parking spaces per dwelling unit. Why do you have such a big difference?
It's code driven. So again, the multifamily code in Lakewood Ranch is different than the code that we're dealing with. So what I gave to you is the City of Fort Myers code, which is what I'm doing in the city right now. It's also the Lee County code. So I think that the city has adopted Lee County codes, but I don't know offhand, so I'm going to guess. But you just said, what, 1 point on average? So basically what that means is you take, a projected mix of homes, 1s, 2s, and 3s, and you come up with an average. So I think our current projection based on the master concept plan gets you to that somehow, some way. So I was going to point, I don't have a pointer. I'm going to leave the dais and I'll just point with my finger if that's all right with everybody. So.
You don't have a laser pointer up there?
No, I don't have one up there.
Where's our audiovisual committee?
So these are garages, okay? You may choose to rent a garage here, but you may live back over here. It's an apartment community. It's just like what you see. I'll use Mosaic as an example. I think they've sold it. It's no longer Mosaic, but everybody's familiar with it, right down the street on Old 41. Okay.
I don't know
So
where I
it's
read
these
that
white,
too, but I
it's
read.
those white structures basically that are.
Okay.
Thank you. Was it
Thank
on
you.
there? Oh, it's the top button. Thanks. Okay, that's great. Okay, I'm back.
I was thinking those are islands.
So that's, and again, the 22% is sort of, you look at a market, right? How many people are willing to rent, at additional cost, a garage, or at additional cost, a carport? And what our research has found is about 11% of the overall would rent one or the other. So we start with that. We try to be data-driven folks, and so that's what the data is telling us, and that's sort of where we've started. We'll know a lot more when people begin to live in the first two that we have. But does that help answer
Yeah,
questions?
yeah.
Does anybody else have questions relating to? I know this is a new product, so if there are specific questions, but and I know you also don't see the sidewalks, and that's because LDC doesn't require sidewalks internal other than to get to the common space from the outside. So,
I think you've answered what I.
all right, thank you.
Anything else from the board for this gentleman?
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
I'll just really quickly wrap up, summarize what our points. So you do have a staff recommendation of approval. As we've been talking about, our only points of contention are related to conditions 5 and 6. We do believe that even with the removal of those two proposed conditions, that we have identified consistency with the comprehensive plan and the land development code. We're providing a development that will improve compatibility with the surrounding community out here, and the approval of this project will allow for us to complete the remediation and redevelopment of a historically impacted site. If you have any more questions for us, we're happy to answer.
Yeah, I do. Go figure. So we had an original plan to go in there. That one's being discarded, and y'all have submitted a new one.
Correct.
I heard you say earlier, environmental conditions have degraded in between. Please
Right.
expound on that.
Sure. So on the left-hand side, you can see what the site looked like at one point when it was developed with, oh, this is fun. When it was developed with an RV park. You can see the RVs there, and you can also see here in the center, you maybe can't see it super well, but there was a sewer package plant, some, holding ponds there. Those holding ponds have been since remediated, the RVs have been removed, but because there's not been any construction on site, because there's not been any maintenance of that property, the vegetation has become significantly degraded. So you see a lot of invasive species on the property, and the quality of the vegetation has degraded since it has been left vacant.
So we've got stuff growing there that we don't like to encourage in this community.
Correct.
Did I see something about tortoises? Gopher tortoises?
I don't know if we have bear online, but we will be complying with, state and federal requirements for listed species that exist on the property.
Whatever Laura says. Okay.
Are you finished with your presentation
I am?
for the entire project?
Yes.
Okay. I have 2 pages of questions.
For them or for the
Perhaps-
city?
Perhaps we
Actually,
can
for both.
Okay,
Staff
well,
go then.
Yeah.
Want to let staff go first?
You
proceed.
might get your questions answered with the staff. Oh, you,
Well, let Mr. Galloway ask the question in the appropriate applicant will answer.
No, I think you want, the staff should go
I'd
first.
recommend if you have questions for both, whether the questions are answered by the staff or at the end, maybe it's easier for the
You
appropriate party to come.
you want the staff presentation and then questions? Okay, all right.
I know you want lunch. I know you want lunch.
No, please.
Deliveries
Do I
here
look
are
like I
difficult.
missed too many meals?
I don't, we'd just like to reserve the right to rebut.
No one's gonna stop you.
Okay. Mr. Figon?
Good morning, Mike Fegan again for the record. I will go through a very brief, I think this is mine. Nope, wrong one. Sorry about that.
Did we break it?
No, you didn't break it. There we go. And now I can't see where I'm going. Okay, Mike Fegan with Community Development for the record. I'll go through this relatively quickly so we can get to the traffic concerns. We do have Tom Ross, our transportation engineer, on the phone listening in, so he'll be able to go over the staff perspective of those concerns. But for now, we'll go ahead and we'll just cover some of the basics. I'll try not to repeat too much of what Jeremy and his team have already discussed. But I do want to give a shout out to our staff review team. As always, we put it through its paces and it was looked at with all of the required disciplines for the project. And obviously, as you know, this is a request to rezone from an existing residential plan development to a new residential plan development with findings and conclusions based on LDC requirements and criteria, followed by a staff recommendation, public comment, your recommendation, ultimately, city council. And we know what the request is, so there's no need to hash that out again. You saw the aerial in Jeremy's presentation that shows what tends to be in the surrounding area. You do have the YMCA directly to the south. You have Morton Grove, an existing residential area to the west. You have some vacant agricultural areas to the east. You have Sun Village Estates to the northwest. You have some single-family and agricultural also to the north, and a conservation area directly to the south on the south side of Terry Street.
Mike, is that aerial in our package? Did you see it, Bruce?
No, there is a version of it in the package that was submitted by the applicant, but this is one that I created for the presentation.
It's nice. I would have liked to have seen it 4 days ago. Please continue, sorry.
So with the background, as you were told, this is in the high-density residential future land use category. It was reclassified in 2007, which allows it to be developed up to 10 units per acre. Shortly after that 2007 reclassification, there was a zoning change that was approved to change the zoning from mobile home to residential plan development for 200 multifamily units. Again, the project was never developed. These master concept plans that are tied to these residential plan developments are valid for 5 years, or unless a substantial portion of the project has been constructed. That didn't happen. The plan expired. Here we are today. So this is an aerial of the Glades Haven Mobile Home Park, which was what was on site prior to 2007. It started construction in the late 1960s. I think it was fully active by 1972 or 1973. But you can see this is what was on the site previously. And we already went over the master concept plan, but what I want to do is I want to jump to one more slide and show you the proposed master concept plan next to what was on there previously. So to the applicant's credit, one of the things you can see is they're trying to focus the development largely on the areas that were already impacted by the mobile home park. So you can kind of see where there's a natural progression along the south, the west, and towards the middle of the project where the mobile homes were, and that's largely where they're placing their buildings. You can see on here that the eastern portion of the property was left relatively open and vacant, and that coincides with where they're proposing to put their indigenous preserve area and some of their stormwater management lakes. With the schedule of uses, I don't think there's really any concerns on that specifically. The uses tend to be customary to most residential developments that we have in the city. The multifamily detached, which is what they're calling this building product, that is a new one for the city. We did ask them to provide a definition for consideration for exactly what that entails. And I think part of the concern stems from the definition that was provided. While we understand it, I think it still led to some confusion about exactly what type of project this was going to be, and as a result of that, what type of traffic it ultimately would generate. The development regulations are listed on your master concept plan. We don't have any concerns with those development regulations. There is a deviation that has to do with one of the parking regulations that staff did analyze and is recommending approval on, which we'll get to later in the report. With regards to stormwater, part of their 4-page master concept plan does include a proposed stormwater exhibit. And now again, at this stage, at the zoning stage, it's relatively high level and conceptual. The more detailed plan will be provided at time of development order, which is when they provide their final engineering plans. But the overall concept was reviewed by the city's engineering department, and they didn't have any concerns with it. It's going to be designed to treat and hold stormwater on site and discharge at the appropriate rates based on South Florida Water Management District codes and requirements. And one thing just to keep in mind, because I know at one of the neighborhood meetings there was concerns about stormwater and drainage, which is fine. That seems to be a relatively standard concern with most projects in the city. We do have a requirement that this project cannot cause additional stormwater runoff onto surrounding properties. So where Morton Grove is directly to the west, the water that they receive right now, the water that flows through that property, it cannot increase as a result of this property. So we do have mechanisms in place that look at that in a more detailed approach at the development order phase.
So I'm asking this early, when the ponds fit, when the retention areas fill up, where does the runoff go? Knowing that it doesn't go into surrounding properties. Where does it go from there?
So I believe based on their stormwater plan, it's going to discharge into the East Terry Street right-of-way. That's its discharge point based on the interconnected channel and pond routing system that we have for the city.
It's already in place.
Yes.
Go.
Cool. So with that, I will turn it over to Tom Ross to discuss the traffic conditions and the traffic concerns and give you an idea of where staff's head was at with that. I'm going to stay up here and point and shoot in case he needs me to point at things because he's participating remotely, but I will turn it over to Tom Ross.
Morning, everyone. I'm going to keep this somewhat brief because I think the applicant has pretty much covered this fairly thoroughly. I'm just going to address the two main concerns, or the two conditions that the applicant has concerns with. The first one is regarding the trip generation and the traffic monitoring. As simply stated, the ITE trip generation manual does not have a specific category for a single-family detached that is not on individual lots. So therefore, the applicant was proposing to use the multifamily detached units. However, as we pointed out, that the product is going to be detached buildings, which we feel may generate somewhat more trips than multifamily. We don't know if it will be the same as a single family, but unfortunately, we just don't have sufficient data. We did review the data that the applicant provided from Texas and the one site from here in Florida. While we do agree those trip generation rates are more similar to multifamily, we just don't think that it's sufficient enough. And so we're simply asking for a monitoring requirement that would simply be a traffic count done at some point once the project is constructed during peak season that would just validate the results of what they've already proposed. And of course, if it shows that the trip generation is low, then all is great. And that's all we're looking for, is just a validation of the trip generation rates that they're using. So it's really a simple requirement for a traffic count. The other requirement is for the intersection control evaluation study. As the applicant pointed out, it is true that this is a DOT developed process. It's typically used when they modify or reconstruct highways or intersections. However, in this case, it is a small local intersection, but it is being introduced with a fourth leg to the intersection, the north leg. While there is a left turn lane going to that leg today, it is effectively not used at this point since the property is vacant. So these will be new traffic movements that will be introduced into the intersection, creating new potential conflict points. And so in order to address that, we are asking that the applicant do a study. Now, the ICE process can be scaled down to a small intersection such as this. It doesn't have to be the full-scale analysis that Mr. Treesh went through. While that's used on some of the larger intersections, this one could be more focused on the local intersection at hand. And what we're envisioning is a simple evaluation that looks at the existing configuration of the intersection with the fourth leg introduced, possibly comparing that to a couple other options such as four-way stop control, a roundabout, and possibly a signal. And this would be really to address those new movements that are being introduced into the intersection. So this could be scaled down and would not have to be a full-scale, elaborate ICE study, as Mr. Treesh pointed out.
Which would require less time and less money.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And that's all I have on the traffic. Mike?
Did you want to follow up with any questions for Tom specifically, or did you want me to keep going?
That one question I had.
Okay, we'll go ahead and keep it going, then we're almost done here. So with the environmental, they provided the required environmental assessment for staff to review, and as you can tell based on the previous slides that showed the mobile home park, you had about 15.35 acres of the 20-acre site that was essentially disturbed lands from previous development.
Give me those numbers again, please.
15.35 acres.
Disturbed out of 20 acres.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. They are proposing a 1.69 acre preserve area that's going to be on the east side of the property, which again tends to make sense based on previous development patterns there. There were 7 heritage trees that were found on site. There was 1 oak and 6 pines, and they had there's an agreement to preserve 2 pines and the oak in the preserve area, and then the rest of the trees would go through the tree advisory board as part of the removal process. There were several gopher tortoise burrows found on site. I believe there were 4 burrows in total. 2 of them were considered to still be active gopher tortoise burrows. So because of that, the applicant would be responsible for getting removal and relocation permits through Florida Fish and Wildlife for the gopher tortoises.
Would we do we recommend they relocate to their own preserve area? Do we care, Laura?
Yeah, I don't think we have a say. I think it's up to Florida Fish and Wildlife where they go.
Yeah.
So,
That's the right answer?
was I right? Yes. Cool, I was right.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mike, on the removal of the heritage trees, is there going to be some sort of replacement to make up for that, or is it just going to be removed and nothing else?
Good question. Yes, there is going to be replacement, and it is one of your conditions of approval that lays out the replacement standards. It is, and pardon me for not having it up right away, it is condition number 12 that establishes the ratio for replacement of the removed heritage trees.
Thank you.
So we also, as with these applications, we review them against the comprehensive plan. So we reviewed the future land use category, the transportation element, housing element, infrastructure element. The remaining elements we didn't feel were applicable to this particular case, but as we talked about before, the future land use is high-density residential. which allows 10 units per acre, which is right where they are at right now with their proposal, at a 20-acre site for 200 units. The transportation, we've talked a lot about that, but also with the transportation, it's important to note that they are going to be providing an 8-foot wide multi-use path that runs parallel to Terry Street as required by code. It is going to be located on their property and not within the Terry Street right-of-way, but we do have a condition that explains that they need to dedicate that to the public, so it remains open to the public in perpetuity. And also within the development itself, there is going to be a very well interconnected system of sidewalks that can take you from all the buildings to the amenity center. And we're also going to be asking that they provide bike racks throughout the project as well to really enforce that multimodal transportation scenario that the city has put a premium on. With the housing element, we do have an objective that says that you need to provide a variety of housing types within the city for all various types of incomes and rentals, ownerships, the whole deal. So this definitely checks off some of those boxes. It's going to be a rental project overall. That's our understanding of it. And it is a very unique design, multifamily design, perhaps. So it does meet that intent. It is going to provide an amenity center. It's going to be gated, so it'll be a safe and secure neighborhood. So we do feel that it meets the intent of the housing element section of the comprehensive plan. For the infrastructure, BSU is going to be able to serve the site with water and sewer. There will be coordination that takes place with Lee County Solid Waste for how to do the solid waste removal on site. And the other infrastructure element is, of course, the stormwater facilities, which they are going to construct and do it in accordance with city regulations and South Florida Water Management District. So we do feel that it demonstrated compatibility with all those necessary areas of the comprehensive plan. With regards to the deviations, there were 4 that were requested. Staff is recommending approval of 3, and we are recommending that one of them be withdrawn. We don't think it's necessary at this stage, but we'll quickly go over those. Deviation 1 has to do with the parking rate, and really their thing was it has to do with the parking rate for the amenity center, which is very similar to how we park recreational facilities at a 1 parking space per 100 square feet of floor area. Their justification was that the site is relatively compact and walkable in terms of what the overall design is going to lend itself towards, and that because they're going to be providing the interconnected system of sidewalks and the fact that you're going to have many residences that are within walking distance to the amenity center, is the amenity center parking rate really necessary at this point? So staff reviewed it, and staff does recommend approval of that deviation request. We do tend to agree that the site is relatively compact in terms of what the overall design is going to end up being. When you do it on a square mile basis, it's actually less than half a square mile of development area. So it does tend to be very walkable. We do have a condition, though, that we do want to see additional bike racks placed throughout the development to foster not just walking, but also biking to and from the amenity center as well.
Yeah, I have a question. Oh,
Excuse me, quick question. Handicap parking,
Yes.
is that going to be is that a federal rule or
Yep,
is
it's
it applicable here at all?
sure. It's done in accordance with ADA, and essentially what ADA says is based on the number of spaces that you provide for a project, a certain percentage of those have to be ADA.
And they do not have to be at the amenity center? They can be scattered throughout
They're going to be scattered throughout. Obviously, when they submit their final parking design, we're going to essentially request that they put some by the amenity center. And their standards, about closest to the main entrance and things like that. So it'll all be reviewed as part of the development order. But they're not asking for any deviations or variances from the ADA parking considerations.
that was my question.
Oh, okay, there you go. Great minds think
You
alike.
got it, that's exactly correct.
Deviation 2 is a deviation from a Chapter 3 Standard 3-331, which requires a 50-foot setback from land under separate ownership for lakes or stormwater areas, and they wanted to request a deviation to allow just a 25-foot setback from Terry Street. the justification is that, the lake's still going to be buffered from passing motorists. There's not going to be any real risk of conflicts between an errant car running into the lake. There's buffers, there's existing drainage swales, plantings are being proposed. Staff understands that and tends to agree with that analysis. However, this is a technical deviation that tends to occur at time of local development order. So our perspective was that asking for it now at time of zoning may not necessarily be the most appropriate time to ask for it. Typically, this comes with the final development plan, the final lake cross-section plans, the final drainage plans, the final plans that show the location of the lake specifically. And we feel that's a better and more appropriate time to ask for a deviation like this. And that's what the code suggests as well. It's why it's written into the code that way, that you can ask for these types of deviations at time of local development order. So we feel this one could be withdrawn, not necessarily because we disagree with it or see an issue with it. We just think it's the wrong time to ask for it.
But there's a 50-foot setback
Yes.
east, north, and west.
Yes, they are meeting that east, north, and west, correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Deviation 3 has to do with lake sinuosity and sinuosity of shorelines, and I put a little graphic up here to kind of help you demonstrate what we mean. A sinuous design is the waviness of a lake bank or a shoreline as opposed to just making it a straight line. The purpose of sinuosity in many respects is to do a few things. It's to help maximize the amount of littoral plantings you can plant along a lake bank. These are examples of various types of littoral plantings, and I'm sure you see them all over the place. You see grasses and plants that are kind of sticking out from the lakes, and they have multiple functions and purposes for the health of the lake. They can filter out nutrients in the lake and in the water itself before it discharges off-site. They're also very good at help preventing lake bank erosion and the erosion getting further and further back from the lake center and more towards the residential areas. And the purpose of a sinuosity and a sinuous design is it allows you to physically plant more littoral plantings than you would if it was just a straight line. So you allow more of these plants to occur on site, which is just good. What the applicant has agreed to do was, in lieu of doing a sinuous lake, was to still do sinuous littoral plantings. So you could actually make the lake bank sinuous by planting on an undulating pattern with your littoral plantings and grasses. So they did agree to that. So because of that, staff didn't object to this deviation because it is still meeting the intent of the code to provide these littoral plantings that are going to be hugely beneficial for removing certain nutrients from the water and also preventing erosion.
Mike, I have a question, what you just talked about. It states on page 79 that there'll be no use of any chemicals within 10 feet of any water body or any wetland preserves. I always have difficulty figuring out in my own mind, within 10 feet, is that during dry season, is that during rainy season? Where does a 10-foot actually get measured? I'm just a curious question.
You know? So it's measured from the control elevation of the lake?
Well, the control, okay, all right.
Okay. Anything else for Mr. Figon?
He's got lots more
Oh,
to
you
go.
have
All right.
another deviation?
A few more slides.
Can I talk about this? Is it appropriate to ask about this deviation now? So we've got a code that we've all liked before that says we want sinuous lakeshore. So why would we want to ever, is the code wrong? Is that a bad thing? Why would we want to get away from this?
No, I think what we're looking at here, and maybe this is a good example on the top part, is you see how you have several lake areas, proposed lake areas that are abutting their preserve area and their indigenous area. And basically what they did was they did an analysis that showed where a lot of the invasives and the exotics are that are going to be removed. And what tends to be left is a somewhat straight line of preserve area that is abutting the lake. So what they're saying is in certain portions of the lake, not the entire lake, because you can see it still does bump in and out here, it bumps in and out around here, it curves up here. This lake on Terry Street doesn't have much issue at all, but there are certain areas, if you will, where it's straighter than other areas. And what they're saying is instead of taking over more preserve area to make that portion of the lake sinuous, can they provide littoral plantings as part of the sinuosity? So the entire lake is going to get littoral plantings anyway, but what we're suggesting is that on the parts of the lake where it's a bit more straight, that they plant them in a sinuous lake pattern. It achieves the same thing. Again, the purpose of the sinuous lake bank is for littorals. So if the littoral standard is still being met, that's the thrust of that section of the code, and that's what they are agreeing to still do.
Well, this is what I don't understand, Mr. Chairman, is these lakes are going to get dug. They're not there now.
Right.
They are our retention area for stormwater runoff. So why not just dig a curvy bank? And why ask for a deviation? What's the point?
I think part of it might have to do with the stormwater calculations as well. As you heard in other projects in the past, that these tend to be very, very precise calculations in terms of the amount that each lake should hold compared to the discharge rate of where it goes to its ultimate discharge point. And essentially what they're saying is the design they've come up with is what keeps their stormwater plan in balance. Not to say that that's an unreasonable question, but from the staff perspective, they can achieve the same thing without messing up their stormwater calcs by just planting additional littorals, which they've agreed to.
So do you think that these straight littoral lines are going to contribute to erosion? I mean, that's the purpose of the sinuosity, to prevent erosion, correct?
Part of it, it's to allow you to be able to plant more littorals. The littorals are what ultimately help prevent the erosion.
So
So the littorals are still going to be there.
So that's right. I
But
mean,
they're
so this
planted
is
off-
not going to prevent, it's not going to encourage erosion.
Correct. And the littorals will be planted in an undulating sinuous pattern to allow more of them to be planted in areas where the lake tends to be a bit more straight.
I'm having a problem picturing that. I've got a straight line and then my plants are doing this?
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of...
Roads up to the plant anyway.
You can kind of see it in the image below where you have I mean, essentially it's a straight line here, but you have plants that kind of jut in and out. And in fact, they planted 3 different layers of littoral plantings here to help achieve that same effect of erosion and nutrient control.
The purpose of this provision is to, quote, increase the length and diversity of the littoral zone.
Right.
Okay? Undulating plants don't increase the length of the littoral zone, nor do they increase the diversity of the littoral zone. This makes absolutely no sense to me at all.
It does increase the length because I don't want to speak incorrectly on the math of it though, but the amount that you can plant in a straight line versus if I come up 100 feet off of that straight line and come back down, come up and back down, I'm going to be able to get probably 2 or 3 times the amount of plants if I just go from A to B. So it's that concept in practice that allows the additional plantings to occur, and it's...
The littoral zone is a combination of water and land.
Yes.
Okay?
We're
talking about land. You're not talking about... The length and diversity of the littoral zone is a combination of the water and the dirt.
Mm-hmm.
All you're talking about is planting some more plants in a sinuous fashion. That doesn't take care of the littoral zone in terms of length and diversity. I'm sorry.
How often is this lake going to have water in it? These 2 lakes, how often are they going to have water in them?
What are you proposing?
We'll have it. When it comes back to us, there's been several drainage questions. We'll have Mr. Krebs, the engineer, come up and address all of them at one time, if that's okay.
Okay.
Can I make a comment? I think out there during rainy season, it gets very wet out there. And there's water that kind of goes out there quite a bit. So I think they'll fill up.
Has anybody looked, I meant to do this before I got here. Go to Google Earth. What was this property doing right after Irma?
Well,
Did anybody look at it?
it was flooded a little bit because it is bermed, because of the existing developments that are on the north and the west, and they have berms. And they have berms because they have to hold their stormwater. So, I mean, yeah, it did flood a little bit because of the berm.
And that berm's gonna remain. Berms are gonna remain.
Well, the berms are part of the existing development, so West Morton installed it as part of their drainage requirements, so this project is separate from that.
What's the other project you just mentioned?
West Morton, directly to the west, the development directly to the west of it. I'll show the aerial.
That way.
Okay.
All right.
This project here, as part of their stormwater requirements and their ability to contain their own stormwater on site, there's actually a berm along this line here.
Point it out again?
Sorry. So this is West Morton, which is existing.
Yeah.
And as part of their stormwater requirements and to be able to maintain their stormwater on site, there is a little berm on this side here. So it is adjacent to the property we're talking about.
Okay.
Okay, deviation 4. So deviation 4 has to do with perimeter setbacks from a project boundary of 15 feet. And the request is to allow a 5-foot setback on the northeast and west sides. And essentially what is being proposed is that, you know, again, they're trying to develop within the previously impacted 15-acre portion of the site that held most of the mobile home development and the package plants and the ponds. And in order to do that, they are, I suppose, especially based on where their proposed conservation area and preserve area is located, you are somewhat squished on two sides, especially the north and the west side, in terms of where you're going to be able to put your development overall. And largely, this would be for accessory structures and fences and walls. And what the applicant is proposing is that if there are any principal structures that are within 15 feet of the boundary, that they would provide additional plantings and landscaping to help visually screen the projects from abutting properties. And when you look at the surrounding properties and what they're able to do and how close they're able to build to their property lines, for many of them it's within 5 feet of that common property line anyway. So we didn't see it as an inconsistency of being allowed to develop within 5 feet of a shared property line when the person on the other side can do the same thing. But we did want to go ahead and stipulate that it's not just going to be for principal structures per se, that anytime anything is within 15 feet of the perimeter, there's going to have to be additional plantings taken into consideration. So at time of development order, they are going to have to provide a planting plan that shows how they're going to treat and address the perimeters where they are going to be less than 15 feet from the property line with structures. And they will provide that plan at time of development order once they have their final drawings in place. So with that, we go to the plan.
Hang on. You lost me. Deviation 2 says we need to stay 50 feet away from the property line that we share with somebody else.
That was for lakes. That was for stormwater lakes. That was a separate deviation just for lakes.
Just for lakes.
That's just for lakes.
Now we're talking about
Structures.
the buildings themselves.
Yes.
Being 5 feet away from the property line.
Mainly fences and walls, but where there are going to be principal structures less than 15 feet is where they would propose the additional plantings to screen. And what the staff's essentially retort to that was, you're going to do it for anything that's within 15 feet of the property line.
Okay.
So with that, we come to the review criteria, which is based on those code sections that we went over earlier in the presentation. We do believe that this demonstrates compliance and consistency with the Bonita Plan and the applicable land development code regulations. We do believe that it meets the performance and location standards. The density is appropriate. They're not exceeding their allowances in the comprehensive plan. We believe that this type of development is compatible with existing and planned uses. It's a residential development on a residential future land use category surrounded by residential on two sides. We mostly believe it wouldn't place an undue burden on infrastructure, but I think that's where we come back to staff wanting those monitoring conditions and that control evaluation study to better understand the trip generation and the additional turn movements that will come as the result of this project. There won't be any adverse effects on environmentally sensitive areas. In terms of the listed species survey, we discussed the gopher tortoises and their requirements to have to go through Florida Fish and Wildlife for relocation permits. Public facilities are available to serve the site. We believe the uses are appropriate. We believe the conditions do provide safeguards for the general health and well-being of the public and the site itself. We believe our conditions are reasonably related to the request, and we do believe that the deviations would overall enhance the objective of the plan development. So with that, we come to staff's recommendations and conditions. We do recommend approval of the request subject to our conditions. One would be obviously consistent with the 4-page master concept plan that they provided for staff. The schedule of uses as listed in your staff report there. The setback regs and development regs, they should also be consistent with what was proposed. There is an 80-foot access easement that exists right now on the west side of the property that is a private easement. It is not a city easement. It is a private easement between two former property owners. And it's my understanding that the developer would be able to gain control over that easement, and we would request that it be extinguished. It was an original easement for access, and obviously we don't want to put buildings in an access easement, so they would be required to extinguish that easement and provide evidence in the public record that that easement has been extinguished as part of their development order submittal.
Who owns the easement?
It's private property owners.
So this particular site, this particular piece of property owns that easement?
Yes.
And it necessarily comes with the deed transfer?
Right. Correct. And what we're saying is, based on your plan, you're trying to put a building in it. You can't do that, so get it extinguished.
Thank you. Please continue.
Sure. Condition 5 is the intersection control evaluation study that Tom had spoke about before. Condition 6 discusses the traffic monitoring. Condition 7 is what requires the multi-use path that they're proposing adjacent to Terry Street to be dedicated to the public. Condition 8 requires bike racks throughout the neighborhood to also foster multimodal transportation throughout the site. Condition 9 is tied to the deviation, actually, that can be done at time of local development order, the technical deviation for the lakes. They did provide some cross sections as part of this master concept plan that showed what that proposal would look like. And what we're saying is, if that deviation doesn't get approved at time of DO, you got to revise your cross sections, obviously. We need everything to match. Condition 10 is the littoral planting requirement, where it requires the littoral plants in an undulating planting pattern, and it requires a planting plan to be submitted at time of local development order. Condition 11 has to do with the 5-foot perimeter setback, where they would need to provide a planting plan for anything that is within 15 feet of the project perimeter boundary. Condition 12 has to do with the heritage tree replacement and the ratio for how to deal with the heritage trees that are being removed. Condition 13 essentially says, unless approved by deviation or variance, you have to meet the city's bike ped code for bicycle pedestrian requirements. And condition 14 says that approving this zoning request does not guarantee development order approval. It does not guarantee building permit approval. It does not circumvent those processes. So with that, if you have questions for myself or the applicant.
Well, may I propose, please, that we take a 15-minute recess in order for us to just get back together? Please come back at I don't know, 10:50, I guess. 10:45, 10:50. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The thing is question time. So,
Well, you'll have their rebuttal to say.
a rebuttal,
Thank you.
please.
There's been several drainage questions, questions about the berms, the littoral, historical drainage, and we're going to ask Charlie Krebs to come up to further explain the drainage. And Charlie's an expert in, a civil engineer and surface water.
We get back to one of our site plans.
No, neither did I.
Gotcha. Oh, down there, okay. They closed it.
You know, may I just make a suggestion before you even talk this? Does the board have any additional questions on berms that need to be answered specifically?
I know what they are.
On berms?
Berms, that's what he wants to talk about.
Well,
I
water
don't think
management
we
in
have
general.
questions, do we?
I'm sorry.
I don't have any questions.
I
on
couldn't
berm.
find, I have one, I couldn't find a topographic map in any of this, yet the statement in there says that no water runs through this site to any other sites. Does that mean that this property is higher than everything around it?
This property is kind of at a natural ridge, and the water right now is flowing to the underdeveloped property to the east. And with the development of the water management system, we'll put perimeter berms around that'll contain the runoff. It'll treat it according to the South Florida water management codes, provide the attenuation, the water quality, the nutrient removal, before it discharges over towards East Terry Street.
So the entire property will be bermed?
The entire everything within the water management basin will be bermed, correct? And then the reason for, as they were discussing, keeping that straight edge along the preserve is just a way to conserve as much of that indigenous vegetation as possible. If we undulate that berm, you're going to be eating into that indigenous area, and if we can do that same sinuous shoreline by just providing the littorals wider into the lake, so you might see it at 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, but we'll create that sinuous feel just by widening the littoral plantings into the lake. And that way we're preserving as much of that indigenous area as we can.
What's the elevation height? I mean, for the land, just curious right now.
I don't remember off the
Okay.
top of my head, I'm sorry.
I'm just curious.
If you're saying that if you make the shoreline more sinuous, you would reduce the capacity of the.
You wouldn't reduce the capacity, because the idea would be to keep
go
the same
deeper,
lake
go
area.
deeper, can't you increase the capacity? Or do you hit a water table, or?
So the way that the water management calculations work is it's everything for control above when you're talking about attenuation and treatment. Nutrient removal is when you're talking about depth. So if I'm trying to attenuate and hold that water back and reduce it at a much reduced rate than what you're seeing right now because it's undeveloped, it's just sheet flowing off to the adjacent property, you're looking at from control above. That's where you're storing that water. So going deeper as far as providing additional stormwater storage doesn't work. It just provides additional nutrient removal.
So I heard you say that if we're going to make the shoreline sinuous, we're cutting into the preserve area.
Correct. Way you would make that sinuous, because we need to have that lake volume, you're going to be putting it up against that indigenous area. So there's a chance that we're going to be impacting more of that indigenous area to create that sinuous feel, where we could just create the same feel by taking the littoral plants and planting them out into the water more. So instead of having only a 5 or 10 foot, it might go 15. And you're still going to get that sinuous feel when you look at the plants, but they're going to be in the water more than on the land.
But aren't they going to die when it's full of water?
Oh, no, the aquatic plants they thrive in the water. In fact, the farther out in the water when you get the dry season, those ones in the water will survive better. But you have different plants that you're going to plant based on the depth of the water that they're in. Am I got that right, Laura?
It's like the stuff we see coming up in the ditches now. They're thriving with the rain now. They lived through the drought.
Right,
So-
they go dormant in the dry season because the water level reduces.
Is there a requirement of how much preserve area we have that the site has?
Is it 50% of the open space is what we have to provide, and that's what the indigenous area is doing?
Yeah.
And again, the idea is to try to preserve as much of that indigenous area as possible.
I'm all for that.
Okay. Anything else on berms?
If you don't have any more questions, no.
Okay.
The other thing I wanted to talk about were conditions 5 and 6. I appreciated the testimony that Tom Ross provided, and what Tom said is something I think we can get to a point where the staff and the applicant can agree, but what he said is different than what's in writing. For condition 5, he kind of acknowledged that a full-blown ice analysis might be too much, and that we could scale it back and have, you know, a smaller look at this intersection, because what I understand the staff wants to know is when you add the fourth leg, does it work? Does the intersection work with the fourth leg is something we can look at, but that's a very different thing than an ice analysis that assumes you need an improvement, and you're going to do analysis to decide what it is. So I believe, I've talked to Mr. Dahmer and Mr. Rooney, I think that we would like the opportunity to work together between now and council to come up with something that more closely resembles what Mr. Ross said rather than what's in writing. Same thing with the monitoring. I've lived through the DRI traffic monitoring, and you spend $20,000 of residents' money to do a traffic analysis that goes on a shelf and does nothing. Whereas what I heard Tom say is they want a traffic analysis that's going to test the data that was provided to make sure the data holds up, and it's the same here in terms of trip generation. So that's not a perpetual every year for the rest of the project's life type of thing. It's a look-see to test what the data to validate it. So I think that concept is something that the staff and the applicant can work on the language to get to that point, to match what he said, but not what's in writing. So we would ask that you approve it and direct the staff and the applicant to work on the language for 5 and 6 to more closely resemble what Mr. Ross said. I keep pointing up because this down came from up.
This new proposal will be presented when the development plan is presented, right? I mean, you're not going to do it tonight.
No, we're not going to. Every time we try to craft something on the fly, we all hate it later, so I don't want to do that. That's why I'm asking you to suggest that the staff and the applicant work together to craft language that Mr. Rooney won't yell at us about when we go to council.
Which is tomorrow.
Not just the
For first reading.
First reading.
first reading. They don't,
We have 2 weeks.
Oh,
they don't act on it tomorrow.
so they do it twice. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just,
First and second.
being chairman, I should be familiar with this, but I'm not. Okay. That
Unless you
sounds
have
like
any
a
other
good
questions.
compromise. Simple negotiation. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, Mr. Galloway, you had a whole series of questions.
lot of questions.
Well, I mean, please, proceed.
Okay, easy one first. Your deviation 1 talks about no parking in your amenity center, and the distance. What is the distance from the amenity center to straight down the road to the north? Is it half mile? Is that what it is?
The furthest house away, Bruce. right?
Not even the furthest house, just the end. of the
Your
road.
question is the distance of the.
What's the actual distance between the amenity center and follow your parking lot all the way down to the end? What's that right there? What's that distance? Just to give me a feel.
I don't have the exact distance off the top of my head. I think we can get it in just a moment.
That lake to the south, this says it's 100 feet wide? You gotta get your microscope. Magnifying glass.
So the distance from the amenity center up to the south here to the rear residential tract is approximately 1,000 feet.
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet.
Have you thought about the people who are going to buy golf carts, or are you going to prohibit those?
We don't have any golf carts currently.
But are you going to prohibit their use because you don't have any parking for them?
Remember, this is a rental, so this isn't an HOA situation. We can change, the operator can change conditions at any time. The reality is, if people can't park their cars, that's a problem. People will not want to live there. So it's likely, to your point, that we're going to have to restrict golf cart use.
But I'm parking my golf cart in one of my 2 spaces.
Well, you don't,
I'm downsizing from my commute, anyway.
I mean, I think it's important to remember we're talking about something that is a multifamily community. When you look at your apartment complexes, you don't typically see a golf cart parked in those parking lots. It'll be the same situation here.
I just one
That-
quick
that-
question to avoid potential conflict. Each of the spaces will be marked for the resident close by, I mean, with numbers or something like that?
No.
Or is it just open?
so the open spaces are open spaces,
Okay.
okay? Then you'll have a carport, and the carport would be designated
If you rent it.
if you rent it.
But if you don't?
If you don't, a good question. These are questions that I don't
The
know.
guy
If you
at
don't,
number
in theory,
21.
you know, nobody, you know, in theory, somebody could park there arbitrarily and you don't have it, it's not yours. What we find is everything gets rented. So I don't know if we're going to run into those scenarios necessarily.
I'm just curious,
Yeah.
if somebody has 3 cars in number 21 and a fellow from 22 comes home late, he has no place to park.
They
I mean,
limit.
is that an issue or am I just,
So we haven't run up against it in our current
have not.
properties yet, but I'm leasing up the first project now, and we don't have occupancy yet. So
Well-
I'm, you know, I'm a residential guy getting into rentals. So I think that what we'll end up saying is the market will determine that, to your point. It would be
But you
problematic.
don't think that marking the spaces to correspond to the numbers of the house makes sense?
No, it creates a lot of oversight. It becomes difficult, and just because code requires 2 parking spaces per unit doesn't necessarily, as you pointed out, that everybody has 2 cars, right? So basically, in theory, you could have the 2 spaces, you have 1 car.
I understand.
Or you have 3 cars,
Right.
somebody else has 2 cars and or 1 car, and you're using, anyway, the law of averages, that's where the code comes from. so.
It's just speculation on my
Yeah.
part. I mean, just, don't worry about it.
So Bruce, I had golf carts on my list as well.
Yeah, they'll be there.
Okay?
Thanks for the answer. That gives me a sense of scale for the place. This is a rezoning, right? So we're going to have to make findings supporting a rezoning
Right.
on this, and we have to make findings regarding the 4 requested deviations,
Correct.
right?
Yeah. Do you want
Okay.
to read the finding requirements?
Okay. On deviation, I believe it's number 2, which is the setback, 25-foot setback from Terry Street, and you state that when you combine that 25 feet with the right-of-way, Terry Street, you have 50 feet. Now, I have never heard of being able to use the right-of-way of a highway to count as your setback. I would never, ever allow that to happen. So the question is if we don't include the 25-foot right-of-way from Terry Street, we have a 25-foot setback from Terry Street. Okay, and that's the deviation that's being requested. Okay? Which leads me into I have a lot more questions, but I have one major point about this entire project. Okay? First of all, I want to establish that we are not deciding whether or not we need affordable housing in Naples.
That's true.
That's not the
That's
question.
not our purview. You're right.
Not the question at all. We're deciding on a project that is requesting 4 deviations, a rezoning, and the ability to put in 200 units.
It's a rezoning only because the original zoning, which is the same as expired.
Right.
So it's not a rezoning, it's just the zoning.
It's a rezoning. We have to make
Fine
findings.
rezoning. That's what I call it, that's what-
The language used in requesting these deviations, and it's repeated throughout the material, is the deviation is necessary to provide, quote, sufficient developable area.
Okay.
All right? Sufficient developable area for what? for 200 houses, obviously that's a financial target to make this project viable, or somewhere around 200. So is that what is dictating design of this project? Whether or not we can reach 200 units, okay? Why do we have setback requirements in the first place if we're going to say, we have a site that's a hard to get sufficient developable area? The site is what it is. Any design should reflect that. Any design should reflect what the site is and how it works. We're asked again to modify design standards so that, quote, sufficient developable area is provided. Better situation, a better solution for the way to get to the sufficient developable area or on a heavily impacted site is to reduce the number of dwellings so that the standards can be maintained.
What standards?
The setback standards. The setback standards. As there are 4 deviations.
The stormwater retention standards.
We're requesting basically, in my mind, there are 4 variances. And a deviation requires, this is a hardship on us. This is a real hardship because of the condition of the land. But we had nothing to do with it. Condition of the land is imposing a hardship on us. But
Just one quick clarification. The deviation process under the plan development does not require any finding of hardship.
That's right.
Okay,
It's not a variance.
No.
Don't get
Not a
confused.
variance.
yeah, no,
It requires a change of circumstances, which
Yeah, I want to,
it requires.
I want to follow up to what Mr. Rooney said. The
Hardship
staff
is
on
wrong.
page 22 and 23 of attachment A has the findings that you make, so it has, on page 23 of attachment A, it has the actual deviation standards, and I think that might help make it easier, because the staff's already done that for you.
Help me find that.
Page 23.
Oh, what was attachment A?
It's called attachment A.
that's the section of the
Be the formal findings.
land-
I'll
yeah,
get to that.
the land development.
I'll get to that. That's
Page,
another question.
little page 23, big page 23.
So this to me is a self-imposed problem. I need 200 units, so I have to change the standards to get there. Okay?
You gotta ask, we're asking for deviation. You could oppose it, but that doesn't make it, I mean, this is economics we're talking. So just, I mean, come on.
We're talking about design of a project where people are gonna live.
Would it make you
People are
feel
gonna
better
live
if you
here.
had 170 units instead of 200?
That's a question I'm asking. How many units would be lost if the standards were met? Instead of, instead of a 5-foot instead of a 5-foot setback, if you had the standard of a 15 feet, which we have, how many units would you lose? This particular design, I bet you'd lose an awful lot, because this is a small site, 200 units is maxing this thing out to absolute capacity, as far as I'm concerned, over capacity. But,
I'd like to speak to that point, just,
okay.
I guess from my level of experience on the zoning board, and I don't know how long it's been, sometimes it seems like I just joined it yesterday, and other times it seems like 15, 20 years ago. It's all a matter of perspective. But I do not recall, I believe, in my experience on the zoning board, where an application came forward without requesting a deviation, whether it be a single lot, or whether it be a a development such as this, a planned development. And I'm not saying, I'm not going to talk about it specifically, but it seems to me that deviations are allowable by law as long as the rationale behind it. So, and I agree with the chair that obviously if anybody feels that it has to be held exactly to what the code is, then of course you vote against it, and we can't,
have
that's
that right.
reasonable.
And
But
I'd
I
like
don't
to
think
point-
I think deviations are just part of the system because of restriction, just simply because of the lay of the land and so forth. And I've always seen, every single meeting, there's always been a request for deviation.
But that's how it gets to us.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
there's no request for a deviation, the staff handles it, we never see it, right?
Correct. So that's the whole point of our
And
existence.
as long as it meets the requirements of the land development code
That's-
to grant a
that's where I'm coming
deviation, there's no reason why we shouldn't.
Agree.
When the reason is to create sufficient developable area, I have a real problem with that. A real problem with
You're focusing
that.
on that,
That's no reason, if you buy a site that's too small for 200 houses, to say, come in and ask for a whole bunch of deviations so I can get my 200 houses. That's not the way planning
You're
works.
talking about 10 feet.
Yes, I'm talking about 10
10 feet.
All the
And
way
the
around.
the distance
10
we're
feet.
playing with is a structure, a principal structure, 15 feet away from that line.
As opposed to
15
5 feet away.
15 feet from here to here.
Well, I mean,
So why was the setback of 15 feet established to begin with?
Yeah,
At some
well,
point, somebody said,
disregard
that's a
all
good
that.
idea.
because originally it was for a different reason. It was for a, well, I don't know, ask the city. It was for a trailer park.
No, this is
It was
this
originally a
15
trailer
feet is
park.
everywhere in the city, isn't it?
It was originally a trailer park here.
The
That's why it
15
was
feet
15.
setback is everywhere in the city, isn't it?
Not the same.
Look, the intent of the plan development code, and staff can speak, or even the applicant, is to have flexibility in design or to arrange for a mix of uses. In this case, we don't have a mix of uses. RPD is essentially a change in design. The original project, the existing zoning is 200 units. It's the same, it's basically the same density, intensity as the current project. I have no idea if it is closer
And
setbacks or anything else. So the code says you can ask for deviations for any of the existing standard land development, which would be something in a conventional zoning district. And then it has a process, and the standard is, does it achieve the objectives of the plan development code? And are the general, intent, health, safety, welfare still achieved given the deviation? That's the standard to test each deviation. If you find that the health, safety, and welfare would not be served by the deviation, as long as you can articulate what that standard would be, and for instance, maybe it's compatibility. Maybe there's an existing project next door.
The board has an unfettered right to vote against it.
Well, I'm just explaining what the
After we
standard
discuss,
is.
I would-
You guys figure out how you want to find. But, you might say that a reduction in the setback is because there's going to be a compatibility issue with an adjacent project. If you don't, then there may be some other reason you want to have the setback, sufficient drainage, sufficient access for maintenance, et cetera. So I would address each deviation vis-à-vis the intent of the original regulation. And if you have those questions for staff and what the original intent of each standard is, go ahead and shoot it out. I just want to clarify that, so we're not just going around and around on items.
Do we have public comment in this package?
You will have public comment, yes.
Subsequently, after, yeah.
There's no public, but
There is
somebody said
public
there were
com-
three public hearings. Where's the results of those?
Okay, so that's the neighborhood informational, all that information should be in your packet.
I've yet to find it.
The applicant
Mike.
testified to the findings.
We had to provide narratives of the meetings to the staff. I would also ask, as long as Mr. Rooney is explaining the process, that when you make those findings, it's supposed to be based on the competent substantial evidence that's in the record, I believe. I'm correct, but he'll correct me if I'm not.
Well, let's hold a minute. Let's find the public comment. Because, as you were saying, Derek, we've got an adjacent project where people live to the west. We've got potential adjacent projects to the north and east that are not yet there now.
What has that to do with setbacks?
Everything.
I mean, we're talking about a deviation of a 10-foot difference, okay? I mean, that's either going to be, in my opinion, it's either going to be an approval or a disapproval, okay? Simple. Now, if nobody could see that that's a very simple decision, then I'm sorry.
I just want to add one point, that in the packet, I recall there was a letter, I believe, submitted from the public talking about the traffic issue. That was the only thing that stood out for me. He was saying the traffic would be terrible, and we've heard the traffic studies, so that was the only comment that I saw.
The letter's here.
Yeah.
The guy opposes the development.
Right.
One, because of water management issues. He lives to the west, the development to the west. Water management issues.
And traffic.
Traffic, and he includes the trucks from the mining operation, for example, and wildlife, the existence of wildlife on the track now.
Really quick, just to address Board Member Gambrell's question, we only received one letter from a concerned resident, which is the one that Mr. Galloway was just reading from. As far as the neighborhood meeting requirements go, the first neighborhood meeting, which was done prior to the submittal, you could start reading through that on page 198, and the other two meetings start on page 547.
I have a comment, question. I think there's some question as to whether or not the setbacks are restricting the size of the footprint of the buildings. And if we maintain the setbacks as is in the code, there'll be less space for building out the properties as they're currently envisioned. But would the code allow a smaller footprint but a higher building so that you could still get more, the same density, the same number of units, and the same profitability? And how would that change the look and feel of the community?
So they're allowed a maximum height. The residential plan development has a standard, just like it has a standard setback. But I think that as we've discussed a lot of these things, maybe a little perspective to go back in time. In 2001, I drove this site back when it was the Glade Haven Mobile Home Park, and a lot of the council at the time also drove it. And the reason why it was rezoned and the reason why it was taken out of the DRGR and put into this high of a residential density was because of the conditions that existed out there. And at the time, I saw most of the running water going into the mobile homes through garden hoses that connected from each mobile home to the other mobile home. The separation tank for the package plant was not necessarily operational. That is, however, the end result of their sewage. And as...
You lost me.
Sir, how did I lose you?
One mobile home, another mobile home. The only way this person is getting running water is a garden hose.
From one to the other, yes, sir. And they connected somehow inside the mobile homes. They were going through open windows. And one hose went in, another hose went out. So as a result, council felt they had a vested interest in looking for redevelopment and wanted this to transition to a more modern development. And that's why the property was originally rezoned. That's why it was taken out of the DRGR and given this future land use designation. At the time, the 200 units were included as part of that entitlement. We fast forward, that development that was approved at that time was never built, and that master concept plan has since expired. I don't know this, I was not in the meetings, but I would imagine that when this team sat down to figure out what they could do, they looked at the units that was previously approved and it said 200. And they looked at 200. And I would imagine that's where that number comes from. In terms of the 15-foot side setback or any of the setbacks that are included, I will say, unfortunately, we've adopted the Lee County plan development process. And unfortunately, in my opinion, it comes with standard setbacks. I have always approached plan developments as an opportunity to adapt a plan to a specific piece of property. That's the benefit of a plan development. There is no other benefit. If there was not differences in property, if there was not different considerations, if there were not different ideas on how to develop, there'd be no reason for plan development. So we can all be in conventional districts where a 15-foot setback or a 35-foot maximum height would apply everywhere, and there'd be no reason to request anything different. In this particular case, what's being proposed today, and it's not my job to justify it, nor am I trying to justify what they are proposing, is simply a new development type for us. Not new development type in the world, new development for Bonita Springs. As a result, you've seen several conditions that we have proposed that are different than what we normally propose because we want to verify that what we're being presented actually plays out and the impacts of that development are what we anticipate them to be. Part of what they're proposing is reducing this standard residential plan development setback of 15 feet to reduce that down, and also to reduce the front setback. We have setbacks because we control massing and appearance that way. If you have houses where one house is 5 feet from a right-of-way, the other's 20 feet, that's not planning. You know, you start to see negative impacts upon neighbors, and you start to see issues that you can't anticipate. So that's why those standards are in place. In this particular case, what they're proposing, what we've heard before, is exactly right. We're looking at this, is there a justification to reduce these standards? That's up for this board. You know, we've made our analysis, we've made our presentation in terms of what should be accepted. Obviously, what's being presented today was not the original proposal. We've worked back and forth with the applicant. In some areas more successfully than others, but we've gotten to the point where we are recommending approval for this project. If this board feels that we have not justified, or the applicant has not justified the reduction in standards, it is your obligation to state that, and it's your obligation to put that in the recommendation that goes to City Council. Now, what happens from here for every rezoning case, and I know this was also touched upon, there's a hearing before you as the zoning board, then there's a first reading at the City Council. The first reading is essentially just a reading of the title block, and the City Council moves it to their second reading. The second reading is where they have their public hearing. This presentation takes place, fortunately first, so not everybody has to wait for the entire City Council meeting, and that's where the final decision is made. So the recommendation, regardless of what it is that you all provide today, will then reach City Council, and they will use that as part of the record to vote. So I know that we've gone back and forth on these things, but it's a simple matter of, when you look at the evidence that's being submitted today, do you feel there is competent and substantial evidence to approve this project? And if so, under what conditions? There's 4 deviations. Have the standards been met to justify those 4 deviations or not? We believe that they have under certain conditions, but this board has an obligation to evaluate that and determine accordingly. So I don't know if that answers questions or if that creates more, but.
I think what we have to do is allow Mr. Galloway to raise other issues. I mean, that's why we're here.
Hang on a minute, Bruce, hang on. We adopted Lee County stuff. That's where the 15 feet came from?
Yes, sir. So
my understanding of setbacks, there's also a fire component.
There is 2 separate standards. They impact the same thing, but there's 2 separate standards. There's a building separation that the Life Safety Code uses, and there is a setback that's associated with the Land Development Code, and that's under our purview.
But wasn't...
The fire district does not generally comment very much on zoning applications. However, they are very involved under development orders and building permits.
But aren't fire issues part of the reasoning behind we need feet between buildings on different persons' properties?
Part of the reasons, but they don't look at property lines so much as they look at the separation between the buildings themselves.
That's the actual spreading of the fire, jumping.
Correct. Yes, sir. Like water, fire does not recognize property lines.
Thank you.
Bruce? Please, you have the floor. And we can vote closure, I guess, but I wouldn't do that.
The justification for the reduction in standards, setbacks included, that's repeated throughout this paper, is, quote, sufficient to create sufficient developable area. That is, to me, that is not a justification.
Okay.
Okay?
I hear you.
For the setbacks.
All right.
Okay, now, what is the status of the ingress egress easement, that 80-foot strip? This says you were supposed to have it done by January of this year, or was supposed to be done.
The access easement that runs along.
Yeah, the 80-foot strip, right.
That area there.
Right.
That's already been released to the client. We can provide that documentation.
Okay, it's been done.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. In deference to our chairman, eliminate some of these questions.
No, please, please. You have the right to speak.
Yeah, you'll have to explain this to me about the requirements for open space and so on and so forth. What I see is on the master concept plan, residential 9.75 acres, lake 2.43 acres, indigenous area, I guess that's the forested area, 1.69, open space and landscape buffer 2.95, pavement 3.25 for a total of 20.07. There's a requirement for how much open space in this project? Is it 40 or 50%?
40.
40%. Okay, 40% open space. Could you tell me where the number open space and landscape buffer, where that 2.95 acres comes from? Where is that open space?
The open space on the master concept plan, that acreage is throughout the property, so it's going to be in, within your residential areas. It allows for, your sidewalks, your backyards, those types of things.
Sidewalks are counted as open space.
Correct.
The open space is anything that does not have a building on it, correct?
I'm not reading the exact definition when I agree with you, but
that's what you're
generally,
getting at.
generally.
I think we need Laura for that.
Sidewalks, streets, the whole bit, right? Backyards?
I think we need Laura for that.
I mean, somebody's front yard
Sidewalks aren't
is
open space.
I don't know.
Good morning. The Land Development Code defines what can be used for open space. It is generally the pervious areas, but does not necessarily include all pervious areas. Impervious areas such as sidewalks can be included up to, for landscape buffers, it's 20%, but other than that, we don't generally include sidewalks. So I believe your question is related to the open space and landscape buffers, 2.97 acres. So that's besides the lake. That can be counted up to 25% of open space and exclusive of the indigenous preserve area. So that includes your landscape buffers and any backyard areas, and they can expand on that too. But we would not include sidewalks, impervious areas, unless it's specifically allowed in the Land Development Code.
You're satisfied that this meets the 40% requirement?
Yes, and we will be, confirming that at the time of development order as well, that they show that in more specifics.
Okay, thank you. On page 18, and this is about the trees. It says 4 pines will be removed, blah, 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 and every effort shall be made to replace each tree with one 20-foot tall tree, like for like, or two 12-foot tall trees per heritage tree. Every effort shall be made is totally unacceptable as language in a document like this. Either you do it or you don't do it.
Oh, wait a minute, Gary, I'm sorry, that's a best efforts clause. You
No,
see
it's
that
Bruce.
in all kinds of contracts. I
this
can't object to that, I'm sorry.
I
I mean,
object.
that's a best efforts clause.
This to me means it's probably not going to be done.
That was actually the language that the Tree Advisory Board came up with in their motion to approve removal and replacement of the trees.
Do they do that a lot? Use that language a lot?
No, it's not.
So this was fairly unique.
And I believe the discussion at that tree advisory board was also that if we were, when we actually come in, we would provide, email correspondence that something wasn't available, or to, something to that effect, to demonstrate that we did make an effort to provide a specific species or type of tree.
Yes, having, excuse me, experience previously on the tree board, that was done in many times because of the availability. And right now, I know in my own development here, we're trying to get some replacements. They're just not available because, again, these hundreds and hundreds of units are going in. It's very difficult at this time to get a specific, 20-foot high or 21 or 15-foot. Extremely difficult right now.
Well, that's a good excuse, but,
I think that's what they meant by best effort.
It's the best efforts.
Availability, I think, was a real key.
So it means they don't have to do it if they can't find it.
No, instead of a
No,
20-foot
it
tree,
means-
maybe it's
it
going to be
means-
18 or 15. That's
It
my
means
point.
they have to use every available means to them to find something. And if they can't find it, they've at least tried everything and used their best efforts.
That was
That's
the
a
context of
strictly
that.
legal concept. And where's Mrs., she can explain it, what best efforts are. You don't need it from me.
And another reason that language was included in the tree board's motion is in an effort to increase the diversity of the trees to be replaced as well, because, so it's not just necessarily a live oak tree. We've got a lot of those. So that was another kind of encouragement to increase the diversity of what's being provided. But they will have to prove that they can't actually find a 20-foot replacement tree in a nursery in Florida to staff.
But they have to use every reasonable effort to try to find it. That's what
Correct.
that means.
Correct.
Simple. Next question.
Okay. You talk about filter marshes. I didn't see any filter marshes, or I couldn't find any on the MCP. Where are they?
I'm not sure where you're seeing the reference. It might have been from one of our initial submittals. And the site plan, as was mentioned, we've gone back and forth with staff on revisions, and early submittals included filter marshes, but this current MCP does not include that.
It says the combination of stormwater lakes and filter marsh will reduce off-site stormwater discharge from the current, 0.8 CFS as shown.
What page you on, Bruce?
79.
Yeah, that's a section that is our initial submittal to the city, and we are not including the filter marsh in the MCP in this submittal. And in the later portions of the packet, you'll see that the narrative has changed.
Okay.
One of the three reports, when we only needed one.
I answered most of these already. Artificial turf. Are you still planning on using artificial turf? No grass, artificial turf here?
We are.
How does that affect drainage and runoff?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Artificial turf. Are you still planning on using artificial turf?
We're planning on using artificial turf only in the backyard areas, so it won't be a part of the general landscaping throughout the site.
Okay, and the drainage, the implications for drainage of using artificial turf?
I'll look to our engineer. I believe it's been, incorporated in the stormwater plan.
When we go to do the final design, we'll incorporate those areas and provide additional structures if we needed to collect that water. You can do artificial turf that is also pervious in nature, so that water will filter in, but it'll be the final design of each building that we'll take into consideration and treat it accordingly. So it may not be the hardscape that you're thinking of. It could be a pervious surface with artificial turf on top of it, and like a weed barrier so you don't get plants growing through it.
Could I ask why?
Maintenance. You have such closed areas, I mean, you don't want to put a lawnmower back in all of these, you want to have everybody accessible, so.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, thank you. Let's see. There was some reference to a queuing analysis. You have a gate. This is a gated project?
That's right, it's anticipated to be gated.
Okay, and you referred to a queuing analysis?
So it's quite small here, but if you can see in your packet, there is a depiction of some vehicles there. And at the time that we come in for our local development order, there will be an analysis of the queue length that could occur there, and we'll be required to demonstrate that we comply with the land development code at that time.
Okay, but we don't have that now.
We have not done a queue analysis at this point, no. That will happen at the local development order.
Okay. Okay, answer the easement question. Is this a site plan? Or if you can see it or not?
Can I approach?
Sure. Is that a site plan? That shows the individual houses and access?
It is
What page you got, Bruce? What page is that?
I can't remember where I found this.
Yeah.
It was in here somewhere.
But the purpose of your question on that is?
What is this? Because it shows, this is the first indication I've had in all this material of where the houses actually are in relation to each other and in relation to the streets and the parking. Is the only illustration I've seen.
It appears to be a site plan. It's an illustration of what that layout might look like. It's not anything that's been formally submitted to the city.
So the houses are not,
No common walls.
They showed a picture of a rendering of the houses.
yeah,
And that's what they would look like if all goes according to plan, correct?
Yeah, Mr. Galloway, the plan that you're referencing was an exhibit that the applicant provided at one of their neighborhood meetings to give the public an idea of one of the concepts for how it could ultimately be developed. I think one of the things that they're a little unsure of is what the ultimate final design is going to be, which is why on the master concept plan, you see the building areas more as general block-looking patterns as opposed to individual residences. One thing they are more sure of, though, is the overall architectural theme, which is why they provided those elevations for your consideration. But the plan that you're referencing was purely an illustration at the neighborhood meeting.
Page 597.
okay. That's it. There's a question for the planning department. Do detached dwelling units in Bonita Springs have to be located on a street or a parking lot?
They have to have access, so in that respect, you would have to have them.
Access pedestrian or vehicular?
Both.
They have to have both, then this project can't be done.
I'm not exactly sure how that was connected, but
Parking lot, line of houses, sidewalk, and another line of houses with no vehicular connection to the parking lot. That's what this shows. That's what this shows.
No vehicular connection to the
No
second
vehicular
line of
connection
house.
to the parking lot or the street,
that's not a street.
or a parking lot.
There's, I don't exactly understand the issue. It's not like there's a standard, but they've got to be within a certain number of feet.
No, I said, do detached dwelling units in Bonita Springs, according to the codes, have to be located on a street or a parking lot?
And they have to be provided access, but
Right.
the plan that's proposed to you does meet the standards of the city of Bonita Springs.
Because there's no vehicular access to the parking lot, even though it doesn't provide that.
The site has vehicular access. That's the requirement.
How do they get into the parking lot if there's no access?
Well,
I don't understand the point. What am I missing?
the parking lot is accessed from Terry Street.
From Terry Street?
Correct.
And the cars go into the parking lot? So it has access?
Correct.
Thank you. What am I missing?
My question was, does a dwelling unit have to have vehicular access to a street or a parking lot? And I don't know, half the houses here don't.
The multifamily requirement does not insist that there be a parking space for that unit directly out the front door.
So you've decided the issue of this is multifamily rather than single-family detached?
I think that what we're looking at right now is a new definition. What did we call it?
It is multifamily.
Multifam.
It's just multifamily in the multifamily.
Okay. So that was my mistake in giving them a use they did not request.
Okay. One question from my last questions. Comments raised from attendees at the public meeting, the community meeting, pricing and income targets for the community. There's no answer to that here. Do you have an answer? Can you give us an idea? Pricing and income targets?
What our research finds and what we're doing right now in the city of Fort Myers, and again, we're in lease up right now, so market dictates where these things end up. But these typically, because we're a house, the value proposition is higher than as if you're in an apartment. So what we've found is you're going to find whatever your nicest apartment rents for in Bonita Springs, we're going to be 10 to 25% more than that nice apartment from a rent perspective per unit. Okay, if a one-bedroom rents for $1,500, we would rent for $1,650. That's an example, okay, at 10%. So that just gives you a sense, but we're going to be on the high end of the market.
Okay. And timing of the development, anticipated timing?
We're actually turning, we're probably going to run concurrent now with our plans, given where staff is and hopefully where we end up today with you guys. But we're going to start planning immediately with the intent of putting a development order in place as soon as approvals are met through the city for the zoning, and then construction as soon as we have permits in hand. So let's just say that process takes 6 months and we're starting sometime in October. And then the construction itself would last about 15 months.
Okay. Just one last question. Page 82. Future land use goal for the city. Balanced land use pattern, high quality of life, densities and intensities, preservation of stabilization. The answer was the applicant's rezoning request is seeking to provide the city with a residential project that will result in development of the property at an appropriate density consistent with the future land use designation, while providing for new development to accommodate the population growth where transportation facilities and other infrastructure exists. The proposed RPD is compatible and complementary to the surrounding residential uses. And, the surrounding uses are all in DRGR. And I can't see how this development is compatible with the DRGR zone. So, and first of all, and that statement's meaningless. The paragraph I just read to me is totally meaningless, but I'm a planner and we're used to writing.
So we're not demonstrating compliance with the DRGR future land use category, but we are compliant with the high density residential.
Compliance, compatibility.
And I think we've demonstrated compatibility in that we've taken what was previously intended to be a 3-story multifamily buildings right next to single-family residential, and we've kind of broken that building up in a way that makes it much more similar to the surrounding residential that does exist. So we've provided for consistency with the land development code in terms of development standards, and so I think we've demonstrated consistency with surrounding land uses.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
That's all. Any other questions? Are we ready to vote?
Public comment.
Public comment. Anybody public? All private. Deborah, I think what we should do maybe is poll the board, and it's for an approval of the applicant's application
Chairman.
and the subject to the, go ahead.
Chairman, I think you're asking for a roll call vote?
I think so.
Okay, I think that would probably be helpful, but can we get we just need a motion to approve or deny?
Oh, okay, well, yeah, I mean, may I have a motion to?
We vote on the project as a whole rather than individual deviations?
It's up to the motion maker, so if someone wants to move the proposal as presented with, maybe with the modification that staff and the applicant agreed to, that those two traffic conditions be modified per Mr. Ross's testimony, you can make that motion. You can also make a motion to deny the deviations, but I don't think it's not gonna get us anywhere to go through each deviation separately. So, and the other consideration I would think about is, because the master plan, concept plan relies on the deviations in the design, I don't believe you can approve the project and deny a deviation. You're gonna have to either approve the project or deny the project.
Then I'm going to take it upon myself to make a motion that we approve this project with the conditions imposed by the city.
Chairman, point of order, can you make a motion?
Sure, why not? I'm a member of the board. I need a second.
Second.
Okay, now we can vote.
Chairman Rassio,
I'm in favor.
Bruce Galloway,
Opposed?
Russ Wynn,
Approve.
Gary Gambrell,
Opposed?
Ben Hershenson,
Approve.
Jerry Benson,
Approve.
Linda Waterhouse.
Approve.
Wonderful. So it's approved 5-2. Let me take this opportunity to thank everyone, the applicant and the city, for the fine presentations, and to bear with us for all the questions that we've asked. And thank you very much. Meeting adjourned. Why can't I adjourn the meeting? I'm the
You
chairman.
have more items on the agenda.
What's items on the agenda?
Trust me, I want to,
What, the royal scoop thing?
and I get paid by the hour to sit here, so.
I have a,
No, go ahead, go.
I have a suggestion I'd like to make.
What, the,
Chairman?
well, wait. What's the second item on the agenda?
It's the one right under the first one.
Royal scoop?
You previously asked for updates on projects after they've gone past you to the city council, so it's just a status update.
Well,
on
just a
whether-
report saying it's either been approved by the council or not.
Correct.
Okay, so what happened with Royal Scoop?
It was approved
It
unanimously.
was approved. Thank you very much. All right, the next meeting is May 17th.
Wait, Mr. Chairman, I have.
Now what?
I spoke to you about this earlier. I just have a suggestion, now that this is done, relative to the process we go through.
Oh, that, yeah, okay, yeah.
And this is quite a hefty package of material. It's a lot of paper. And I believe that, when the application comes in, there's always this give and take over a period of months with staff, give and take with respect to some of the elements of an application. And the top packet, the thinner of the two, essentially is where the applicant and the city have come to some sort of an agreement, certain conditions, et cetera. Then there is the historical information that's the biggest bulk of the entire packet. My recommendation would be the summary of where everybody was at a given point towards the end of all this negotiation, that be provided in hard copy. And that the historical component, because it is so hefty and weightable, be available to anybody who wants to look at it, has to be available on the internet to save us a lot of paper. I'm just making that recommendation. I hope my colleagues, I just want to make that recommendation and see whether or not the feedback from staff as to whether or not that's a reasonable recommendation to make, because this is a tremendous amount of work. It's important information. I'm not saying don't put it forward, just simply take the historical aspect of this application and put that on the internet, and let's have the staff's ultimate recommendation available in hard copy.
And you mean historical, you mean the background?
Yeah,
and
the background,
supporting
history, yes,
documentation.
yeah.
Ben, I almost agree with you.
Almost, okay,
Almost.
that's good.
No, I think that's a great.
I think in this short version, if I'm not mistaken, Mike, there's a engineering plan that's submitted in here, engineering study, that's not the final one. That the final one is back in here.
You have a lot of various iterations of certain documents within that packet. So for an example, you'll probably have multiple TIS studies for transportation, multiple environmental reports. Essentially what we do is we look through the initial application. If we have issues, we request they go back and fix it. But since they submitted it, it becomes part of the public record. Your packet is the public record. So that's why you see various iterations of things throughout the packet. And then obviously the longer we go in the process, the fewer the questions we have because things are getting worked out. And that's what gets us to our ultimate point. And then what we do is we take the applicable exhibits from this final point, whether it's the final master concept plan, a final drainage plan, a final environmental plan, whatever it may be, and they become the attachments to the staff report as referenced in the staff report. So everything else is application backup.
Ben, my point is, I think it's a much deeper conversation because there's stuff even in here we don't need and look at and use. Like mailing labels is my huge example. I think it's a discussion for the board. Maybe it's even a separate meeting where we go, for example, go through this and decide what we really need and what we really don't. Because the last time this.
Questions we've had today, certain members of the board want everything, and that's their purview. They can do that if they want.
Yeah, I just want to say.
Bruce must have spent weeks going over that thing, and you have to laud him for that. So, I mean, if it makes him feel comfortable, and it makes us feel comfortable as a board to have everything, well, we have everything.
Again, Gary, I just want to say that my suggestion was just a beginning step, because this is, we're always talking about Bonita Light, we're talking about trees and environment. This is an awful lot of paper to
It can
produce.
be online.
And it hides what we really need to be looking at, is my point. What we really need to look. Bruce, you brought up page 81 of the study. That study was superseded by studies later on, and we can't really tell that from this pack of 600 pages. And we could, and the horror of it all was Linda printed out 1,060 pages and brought it to the meeting that we're supposed to decipher. I mean, my master's thesis didn't come close to that.
Can I make a recommendation that I hope everyone would appreciate, everyone except for the staff? So the backup materials you see will come in various requests for additional information. So there's a submittal, a first submittal package, a second submittal package, and staff they give comments, and then the applicant has a period of time to revise their package, submit it back in. If perhaps what could happen is if in the summary staff application, there be a page describing the historical information based on submittal sayings that this, engineering plan, this, and then that way you can look at the historical information and understand what it is and see if you want to request it, rather than just getting the data dump of it.
Or access it online.
Well, you can, all of it's available online.
That's
But the
probably
question
the
is, if you don't know why you're looking at three different sets of engineering plans, that might not be helpful to you. Now, if you read through the backup materials, you'll see that they are in order of comment letters, so you'll see all that, but it takes extra deciphering. So you have to read the submittals, the response to submittals, and then understand that package, that engineering plan is in there. Is that accurate to what you see in the package? Because that's.
So it's a matter of the board needing to decide yes for this item, no for that item.
I think individually you can all do whatever you want, but if the question is you're not following it, or you're reading all of it, not realizing you're reading three different versions of the same report, that's the question of whether you need this
You know what
information.
you gotta do, Derek? You gotta shepherdize the reports.
Well, like I wanna. Yeah, they don't do that anymore.
He understands what this.
But I want to be considered that the zoning board, the prior zoning board particularly asked for more information. So this is not intended to obfuscate anything by giving you too much information. This is just, historically, the zoning board asked for more and more information, and whether they read through it, I don't know, but the idea is now, if you want it summarized, then we'll do more to do that. But if you want the information, I would hope that we could present it to you in a way that's
The more
helpful.
information you have, the more you tend to delve into it and come off the path that you want to find. It becomes paralysis by analysis, and it's just counterproductive. And it leads to 3-hour meetings.
So when do we decide what we want and what we don't want in these packages?
All I'm suggesting is let's reduce paper. I mean, I'm gonna
Yeah,
keep
but
it
you're
as
right.
simple as I
You
possibly
can have-
can. It's not preventing the information being available
No,
if it's
just
on the
put it
internet.
online.
I just don't need to winnow through 700 pages, as of background information. It's just not that
I think
essential
I
to my
agree with that.
deliberation. But maybe that's just my style.
Well, can we decide that we don't want all of this background information on paper, Derek?
Yeah.
And then to put it online?
How about this? Why don't for the next meeting, anyone who wants the full backup can ask for it, and the city will provide it.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'll get just the staff report and the.
That's done.
Let the record show I don't need that.
Yeah, well, I mean, she'll put it in the.
It's all, if you were to go onto the calendar, city calendar, pull up the agenda, you could download and print it all up yourself.
Yeah.
But the city staff is printing it up to give you don't have to come in to get it, but they'll do it so you don't have to use your own printer. So if you want to do that, you can ask.
So, but that means we also need enough time to know what's in the packet, review the packet, tell the staff, I need more on this. And I would suggest, Ben, we say stuff like.
It's all available at the same time.
Yeah.
Right, but
And this time it was available Wednesday, 3 p.m. prior to a 4-day weekend. I'm going to hold on to my
It
4-day
was
weekend.
available online. You could read it on Easter Sunday.
My point exactly.
Please, I'm sorry. I just.
I move we adjourn.
It means,
No,
but
I mean,
when I'm reading it on Easter Sunday, I can't communicate with the staff further.
Yes, Mrs. Trellipeck.
Everyone available for May 17th, tentative.
So far, I think so.
Or let
I'll
me
have to
know,
check my
email
calendar,
me.
but I'll let you know.
I'll let you know.
I can't.
We will all let you know.
I'm good.
Okay.